For years, I believed my marriage was strong. Not perfect, but solid. Audrey and I had weathered life's usual ups and downs, always managing to find our way back to each other. At least, that's what I thought. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that had been forming long before I ever noticed them. While I held on to the comfort of what I thought was a secure relationship, Audrey had already begun slipping away. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, the kind of change you dismiss as stress, exhaustion, or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. The small gestures that once made our marriage feel intimate and warm slowly disappeared. The affectionate notes she used to leave for me, the way she'd reach for my hand absent-mindedly, the little inside jokes we used to share. One by one, they faded. Life gets busy, I told myself. People change. But this was different. The distance between us stretched wider with each passing day. She started coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations when I asked where she'd been. "Just out," she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. At first, I let it go, but as the nights grew more frequent, so did my unease. When I pressed her for details, she would sigh or roll her eyes, as if my curiosity was nothing more than an inconvenience. That was new. Audrey had never treated me like an afterthought before. Her phone, once something she used casually, had become an extension of her hand. Whether she was sitting on the couch or walking to the kitchen, it was always with her. Late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I would catch the soft glow of the screen illuminating her face. "Who are you texting?" I asked one night, trying to sound casual. "Just a friend," she replied. "Which friend?" Her posture stiffened. She didn't look up. "Why do you care?" I cared because this wasn't the woman I married. The Audrey I knew would have laughed, told me exactly who she was talking to, and probably read me parts of the conversation. But now, there was a wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to her in bed, my voice quieter than I expected. "Audrey, what's going on? Why have you been acting like this?" She exhaled sharply, not even hesitating. If I had something to say, I'd say it. "Let me sleep." Her words hit me like a slap. Any lingering hope that I was imagining things crumbled right then and there. A few days later, the truth came to me in the form of a phone call from a friend. His voice was direct, hesitant, but firm. "Look, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but I think you should take a closer look at Audrey. I saw her with a guy today, and it didn't look like just friends." The words landed heavily, but my first instinct was to deny them. No, not Audrey. Not my wife. There had to be some mistake. But the moment I hung up, my mind pieced it all together. The secrecy, the dismissiveness, the locked phone, the late nights, the way she no longer looked at me the same way. A cold realization settled in. This wasn't paranoia. I had known something was wrong for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. But knowing and proving were two different things. And I needed proof. Audrey had always been protective of her phone, but lately, it had gone beyond normal privacy. She kept it on her at all times, even stepping outside to take calls. When she texted, she tilted the screen away from me. Suspicious? Yes, but I needed something undeniable. Then one night, my opportunity arrived. She left her phone on the couch when she went to the bathroom. My pulse pounded as I reached for it. This was it. This was my chance. I swiped up. The screen remained locked. I tried the old passcode. It didn't work. My stomach twisted. Audrey and I had never kept our passwords from each other. Changing it wasn't just a coincidence. It was intentional. It was a secret, a wall between us that she had built and reinforced. If I couldn't get answers from her phone, I'd have to find them another way. A few days later, the opportunity presented itself. She casually mentioned she was stepping out to run an errand. No details. No mention of who she was going with. Just vague enough to send a chill through my gut. So I followed her. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and trailed behind her at a distance. Street after street, I kept my eyes on her car until she finally pulled up in front of a house I didn't recognize. I watched as she got out, walked to the door, and knocked, comfortably, like she'd done it 100 times before. Then the door opened. A man stood there. I didn't know him, but the way he smiled at her, the way he stepped aside to let her in without hesitation, it told me everything I needed to know. I didn't approach. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just took pictures. I documented it all, the way she walked inside, the way the door closed behind her, shutting me out of her world entirely. I sat there for a long time, staring at the house, at the life I thought I had, unraveling right in front of me. Then I started my car and drove home. That night, she returned as if nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, told me about some errand she ran, and went to bed. The ease of her deception hurt more than anything. I waited until we were both home the next evening. I told her to sit down. She sighed, annoyed, but did as I asked, crossing her arms as she looked at me. Her expression was flat, as if she had better things to do. I took a deep breath and met her gaze. "I want you to end whatever this is," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Or we're done." She frowned, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing going on." I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. The pictures were right there, clear, undeniable. Audrey laughed. That same laugh I used to love, now hollow and cold. And that's when I knew. Our marriage had already ended. I was just the last one to realize it. I watched Audrey's face closely as she stared at the pictures on my phone. For just a second, just a fleeting, imperceptible moment, she looked caught. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, as if she had been caught mid-lie, mid-secret. But just as quickly, the expression vanished, wiped clean as if it had never been there at all. Instead of guilt, she wore something else. Anger. "You followed me?" "That's insane," she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. "You don't trust me, so now you're stalking me?" "That's sick, Nick." Something cold settled deep inside me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even embarrassed. Worse, she wasn't surprised. No denial, no desperate attempts to explain, no scrambling to cover up her betrayal. Instead, she twisted it, turned it against me, as if I were the one at fault. I was the villain for uncovering the truth, not her for betraying me. I exhaled slowly, nodding to myself. "Okay," I said simply, standing up. "Got it." I didn't argue. There was no point. She had already made her decision, and now, so had I. The next week passed in suffocating silence. We still lived under the same roof, but it felt like we were strangers. There were no forced smiles, no empty conversations, nothing to pretend that we were still what we once were. Just two people coexisting in a house that no longer felt like home, waiting for something, anything, to give. She didn't try to explain herself. And I didn't expect her to. I already knew. She wasn't going to stop seeing him. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to fight for us. And I wasn't going to beg her to. That wasn't love, it was desperation. And I wasn't desperate. So while Audrey continued playing house, pretending as if her affair was just some invisible thing that didn't exist, I took matters into my own hands. I visited an attorney, set the process in motion, and quietly prepared for the inevitable. If she wanted to be with him so badly, she was welcome to him. But she wasn't going to drag me down in the process. Then, something unexpected happened. She invited me to dinner. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was another mind game. Maybe she wanted to confess, offer an excuse, or find a way to manipulate me before blindsiding me with whatever came next. Whatever it was, I had no intention of waiting to see how her story unfolded. Because what she didn't know was that I had already made my move. And she wasn't the only one who had found someone new. While Audrey had been sneaking around with her lover, I had been confiding in someone else. Her best friend. It had started as nothing, just shared grievances, quiet conversations about what I had been going through, and the way Audrey had changed. But over time, it evolved. She understood better than anyone what I had been dealing with. And she had no illusions about the kind of person Audrey had become. So if tonight's dinner was meant to be some final act of control, some attempt to keep me tethered to a sinking ship, I wasn't going to let it happen. When I got home that evening, something felt different. The scent of home-cooked food drifted from the kitchen, something I hadn't experienced in ages. There was a time when that would have meant something, when I would have seen it as a sign of change, of hope. But I wasn't naive anymore. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a performance. We ate in silence. She didn't ask about my day. I didn't ask about hers. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware, the occasional sip of wine, and the heavy weight of something unspoken lingering between us like an uninvited guest. Midway through the meal, I set my fork down and met her gaze. She was too composed, too at ease, a woman who had already made up her mind. I leaned back slightly. "So," I asked, my voice calm, "have you ended your affair?" Not a single flinch. Instead, she smirked, tilting her head as if she had been waiting for this moment. Then she spoke. "I'm leaving you." I let out a slow breath, not in frustration, not in anger, but in amusement. Once upon a time, those words would have shattered me. I would have begged, pleaded, tried to fix things. But now they felt like the final page of a book I should have closed a long time ago. A genuine smile crossed my face. Without a word, I stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned with a neatly stacked set of papers. I placed them on the table in front of her and slid them across. Perfect, I said, my tone steady. I already signed the paperwork. For the first time that evening, her confidence wavered. She hadn't seen this coming. Her eyes darted from the papers to me, searching, desperate to find something, some emotion she could use against me. But there was nothing. No regret, no pain. Just calm detachment. Then, ding-dong. Her head snapped toward the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. I, on the other hand, had been waiting for this all night. Pushing my chair back, I took my time walking to the door, savoring the moment. When I pulled it open, she stood there, effortlessly stunning. Audrey's best friend. The woman she had trusted with all her secrets. The woman I had been growing closer to ever since I realized my marriage had already ended. Stepping aside, I gestured toward her. Meet my new girlfriend. Audrey's expression was priceless. More than shock, betrayal. Disbelief. Maybe even regret. She had played her game, convinced she had already won. But she had forgotten one thing. When you play games, you'd better be prepared to lose.